Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. I know it's a Friday afternoon, it's kind of sunny, so I'm really grateful to be able to connect with you all today. As Benjamin shared, my name is Hannah Stevenson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a career educator here at the University of Toronto. The department I specifically work in is career exploration and education. So we support students as well as recent alumni with their job search process, with applying to graduate school, with applying for grants, with all sorts of different things. So for those folks who are U of T students or alumni, just a little pitch for our services and how we might be able to support you through your career journey. As you can see here, today we're going to be talking about optimizing your resume and LinkedIn. Just to give you a little bit about my personal facilitation style, my priority in these workshops, in these sessions, is that you're getting what you hope to be getting out of the session. And to me, what that means is I really value and welcome questions. I don't believe in such thing as a silly question. And chances are, if it's something that's in the back of your mind, it's something that someone else in the space is thinking of as well. So I fully encourage and welcome hands up, questioning, challenging, conversing with me around some of the topics we're talking about, or asking your questions and clarifications as well. And I'll try and keep a watch on to see if anything comes in the chat, but maybe I'll ask the audience if you do see something that I'm missing. If some of our virtual attendees have questions, you're welcome to type those into the chat as well. To jump into our discussion for today, or a little bit about a plan for our time together for the next hour-ish, we'll be talking about learning how to identify transferable skills, as well as adapt your academic experiences for careers in industry. This will be applicable if you're looking to go into academia as well. We'll talk about some of the differences between applying to academic roles and applying to industry roles. Just curious, actually, for the folks who are in this space right now, how many people are thinking of a career in industry or who maybe are already in industry? Show of hands. Cool. And then people who are thinking of academia. Okay, cool. So maybe a little bit more with academia, some undecided potentially. So that's great. And we'll be talking a little bit about both. We'll also be talking about how to explore job postings effectively so that we can make our job applications stand out. Job postings can be one of the best tools that we have to really tailor our applications and make sure we're highlighting, I kind of like to say, speaking the same language as the employer or the institution that we're applying for. So we'll get into that a little bit more later on, but just really figuring out how to tailor those applications. And then after we talk about resumes, we're going to be moving into talking about LinkedIn specifically. So some steps to optimize your LinkedIn profile, some of the considerations to make, what are the types of things to consider when you're building a LinkedIn profile. And then, of course, we'll have space for questions at the end as well. But again, I really encourage them throughout the session too. So for part one, we're going to be talking about resumes. And what makes a great application. So there's a few different things that are really, really important when you're submitting a job application. And this goes for whether you're submitting something in academia or whether you're submitting something for industry. This might seem like a somewhat obvious list, but you'll be surprised about how many people do not tailor their applications to the specific positions that they're applying for. And this is something I really can't emphasize enough. I want to say that in the same breath as validating that I fully recognize that tailoring your applications is a lot of work. So there are certain strategies that we can talk about for tailoring your application, such as developing something called a comprehensive resume, where you might have all of your different experiences that speak to different skills and competencies. I typically might recommend doing a little bit of research on jobs you might be interested in to find kind of the common themes and ideas you're finding from those postings, and seeing how you can develop a comprehensive resume with all of those kind of skills in one. And then what you can do is take that comprehensive resume and break it down and pull in to make a more tailored resume for each position. So this is a process I recommend starting and working on over time, because you may choose to sit down and do a comprehensive resume all at once, but it really can be a helpful strategy in making sure you're actually tailoring your applications for each of the positions you're applying to. We speak to a lot of employers in our department, and one of the most common things, and as well as faculty members, the biggest thing that we hear is people are not tailoring those applications. So one of the most important things I'll say to take away from today. We want to make sure it's well organized, so having consistent formatting, it being the appropriate length. In the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the differences between CVs and resumes, but certainly well organized and showing up with a consistent professional identity in your application documents is going to be really important. So this means even the small details, like if you're submitting a cover letter and a resume, you want to be sure to be using kind of the same font colors, preferably black. We can get into that a little bit more later as well. And then having the same header. So whatever header you're putting on your resume, you want to do the same on your cover letter so you're showing up again with a cohesive professional identity. I'll touch on the appropriate length in the next slide, because again, we'll go over the differences between CVs and resumes. And then you really want to be focusing on your skills and accomplishments. So it should be really clear about the impact and the purpose that you've been able to, or what you've been able to achieve in the experiences that you've had. So not only listing what you did, but going beyond that and showing, okay, this is how it's going to actually impact the employer or the institution that might be considering hiring you. I will send out the slide deck if they can distribute it to attendees. We do have a resume and cover letter toolkit with a bunch of samples. If you type in, so if you're not a U of T student or alumni, you're still able to access something called our career resource library. So you can just type into Google U of T career resource library and it will come up. We have all sorts of different guides, like creating an academic CV, applying for academic positions, also academic interview guide. We also have the same for industry. So again, depending on what area you're planning on going into, this is a really good resource. And again, that's open to everybody. So in terms of the differences between CVs and resumes, this is something that I think is really important to differentiate, and just to note and acknowledge that this is very specific within the North American context. So depending on if folks have studied elsewhere or have moved to Canada, you may have a different idea. I know CVs in Europe and a lot of Europe and a lot of Asia are used kind of interchangeably with resume. In Canada and the United States, they're very distinct and different documents. So you can see here, if an organization, and the one thing to paint with broad strokes, which may not always be applicable, but generally, a CV will be if you're applying for academic positions or like research type positions, fellowship positions, that kind of thing. And resume is traditionally what you would be using if you're applying for an industry position. This does differ sometimes. Some organizations or some industries may ask for a CV really specifically, but do make a note to see what they're specifically asking for, because they are slightly different document types, or quite different document types. So for an academic CV, the audience is academics in your field. There's an unlimited length for your academic CV. So I tend to find a lot of folks, maybe in their master's or PhD, tend to maybe have like a 3 to 6 or 7 page CV. Again, depending on the productivity that you've had, depending on, it may be less if you've had a lot more experience, kind of one specific role. But I just did a workshop with a faculty member who has been in her field for 50 years, and she shared with me that she had a 110-page CV. So CVs are really comprehensive documents of all of your academic experiences. And again, they don't have a page limit. Your focus for a CV will be on your academic achievements and scholarly potential. So you'll be really speaking in the language of your knowledge and what knowledge and specific subject matter expertise you're going to be bringing into the role that you're applying for. There are some essential sections in a CV, and again, this is slightly different than in a resume. You can see here, you need to have your education, any grants and awards you've received, your publications, presentations, as well as your research and teaching experience. You do traditionally include your references in a CV, whereas you can see in a resume you don't. For a resume, the focus is going to be really explicitly on skills. So we think of skills when we talk in career spaces as the language of the working world. So we want to be matching the language that that employer is sharing on their job posting and their mission and value statements and their website, on their LinkedIn page. We want to have a really good understanding of what are the skills and competencies required for these industry positions and try and speak the same language. I always like to think of it as we're trying to make it as easy as possible for an employer to see us in their space. And to do that, one of the easiest things that we can do is incorporate some of the language that they're using. So we're already showcasing that we can fit into their organization. We're speaking in similar language to them. We're talking about key industry terms that they've identified are priorities to them. We're bringing up skill sets that they're focusing on in their job posting, et cetera. So the focus, again, the relevant skills and your experiences, and the audience will be employers hiring for a position. The resume length is really important. I hear all sorts of different information on does a resume have to be 1 page? Can it be 2 pages? Both are totally acceptable. So unless an organization you're applying to has like a really specific requirement, so always check like the fine print of what they're asking for. A 1 or 2 page resume is completely acceptable. The one thing to note is that you do want to have a 1 or 2 page, so you don't want to have like a 1.25 pages or a 1.5 pages. You want it to be at least over a 1.5 pages if you're going to move to 2 pages. The other thing to note is you don't want to break up any of your experiences. So sometimes you'll see like a research assistant position and you might have 3 bullet points under that position. And if you go to the second, sometimes it's like the first 2 bullet points are on the first page and the last bullet point is on the second page. That's something that you'd want to avoid. But in terms of page length, both are completely appropriate. The differentiator that I tend to ask people if they're trying to decide whether or not to have a 1 page or a 2 page resume is there unique and valuable information that you are actively leaving off of your document because you're trying to keep it to 1 page? If yes, then you're probably in a situation where you'd want to include a 2 page document. So you don't want to leave out anything that's really important. In the same topic, you also want to make sure that you're highlighting the most important things closer to the top of your resume, so on your first page, and we can talk about some strategies to do that in the next slide. The essentials for this are demonstrating connection to the position through summary section and accomplishment statements, and you don't include your references on a resume. Typically, after you've had a successful interview, folks will contact you and ask for your reference contact information, so you would leave those out. Before I move on, are there any questions, comments, queries on the differences between CVs or resumes, or kind of the approach for each of these documents? Yeah. Yeah, so like are you talking about like the education section? Awesome. So just to repeat for folks who are joining us virtually, the question was around putting your academic credentials or your education section at the top of your resume versus at the end of your resume. This is something, there's no hard and fast rule with this either. One of the things that I typically will say is, again, thinking of what adds the most value. So for someone who's maybe newer in their career, and maybe they're graduated 2 to 5 years, they're out of their master's program, and they're applying for roles, oftentimes your education is one of the biggest value points or things that you're sharing that can showcase how you can contribute to the organization. So in that case, you may choose to include education at the top. If you've been in your field for 10 years, you have a lot of really great research experience, you have a lot of really great professional experience that is related to the field you're going into, that research experience might be more relevant or important than your educational background. So I think it is a bit of an individual question, but the prompt that I would encourage all of you to reflect on is what is the most advantageous part of my story or my background at this point. And if that's your education, then absolutely you can put that at the top. If it's your professional experience or your research experience, you may choose to put that at the top of your resume. Thanks for that question. Any other questions for Matt? Awesome. So these are some common sections specifically for a resume. So one type of section is called your summary section or your highlights of qualification or profile section. I tend to be a fan of highlights of qualification section. I have another slide that demonstrates that. But what I like about the highlights of qualifications and kind of how I how I frame it is, especially for folks who are researchers, is that it kind of acts as like an abstract to your resume. So you want to distill over across all of your experiences, so academic, research, professional, any of those skills, you want to distill the most important things from your experiences and put them in maybe 3 to 4 bullet points at the top of your resume. And again, I'll show you, I know that can be a little abstract just to speak on, so I'll show you in the next slide what that actually looks like in practice. A profile section can sometimes be helpful for some folks. I generally tend not to be a fan of them. If you're choosing to include a summary or a highlight of qualifications or a profile section, the thing that I would be thinking of is, will this section alone make the employer want to hire me or want to read more about me? So research has showed that typically employers are looking at your resume for about 5 to 20 seconds before deciding if you go into the read further pile or if you go into the no pile. And as someone who's reviewed a lot of resumes, I can corroborate that. I can open up a resume and just as the page is loaded, I know whether or not this person is someone that I'm going to read more on the resume. So how we're structuring our resume and what we're talking about on our resume is going to be so critical in ensuring that you get into that, I'm going to read this more in depth or read further pile. So if you're going to, whatever you're going to put at the top of your section, whether it's a highlight of qualifications, a summary section, or a profile, you want to make sure that that's really grabbing the employer's attention. The next common resume section is education. That's pretty self-explanatory. You may choose to include any awards, scholarships, and/or achievements. You can see under experience, there's a ton of different ways where you can highlight your different experiences. Depending on, again, your background and what the position you're applying for is looking for, you can play with this. And again, the rule is that there's no rule other than you want the most important things to be as close to the top as possible. So that's going to be a theme that I'm going to repeat a few times throughout this session. I am a really big fan of a relevant experience section because one of the things I like about that, particularly again, if you're applying for industry roles, is that you can take experiences that may have been, some may have been paid, some may have been unpaid, some may be more research focused, some may be professional experiences, and you can pull them all together and put them all under relevance. So it allows you again to pull the top things to the front page of your resume. If your work experience or your research experience is already really related to the role that you're applying to or the field that you're going into, then it may make sense for you to have research experience or work experience first. So again, asking yourself the question, what is this role looking for? If it's a research role, research experience might be the top that you choose. If it's a role in industry and you have a decent amount of professional experience you want to highlight, you may choose to include work experience first. So these are just kind of some ways of framing it or deciding how to order your resume. Some folks will also put things like their conferences and training, any certificates or memberships and affiliations that they may have as well on their resume. And again, with any decision of what you're putting on your resume, I go through and like to kind of like mechanically ask myself, what value is this adding? And if I can't give myself an answer, that might be something I choose to remove from my resume. Any thoughts or questions on common resume sections, the order? Yeah.
I have a question. I don't know if it's working on it. So question about the relevant experience. On the page, you put it on the first, the relevant, it means relevant to the job you're applying for. So what if like part of your job, like work experience is relevant to that, and part of your research experience is relevant to the job you're applying? Is it like, it's like repetition or something? Is it, how do you decide? It's like for people like me studying math, I want to clearly classify what should be this section and what should be that section, but the relevant experience is like a mixture of things. How do you decide? Do you put relevant work experience in the first section, then you just mention the work experience again? Or how do you How do you do that?
Yeah, so great question. What I would say to that is that you wouldn't be duplicating anything. So the purpose of having a relevant experience section is, so maybe you've had, let's say you have 5 research experiences in total and you have 5 professional experiences in total. And 2 of the research experiences are relevant to the position you're applying to, 3 aren't. And then maybe 2 of the work experiences are relevant to the position you're applying for and 3 aren't. What the relevant experiences section allows you to do is pull the 2 different, so the professional and the research experiences, and pull them into one section so that everything that's related to the position you're applying for is in the top section of your resume. And then, because all of our experiences, even though if they're not directly related or the most valuable experience that we've had for that particular role, it's very likely that you've gained transferable skills, so even things like interpersonal skills, collaboration, teamwork, maybe analysis, some things that you can apply to different roles. You can include an additional experience section where you still pull in some of those other experiences that may show maybe some like research skills or professional skills that you want to highlight for the employer, but you're ensuring that, again, when someone's looking at your resume within that 5 to 20-second timeline, the first experiences that they see are all the ones that are most relevant. So it's intended to allow you to combine those different areas that would traditionally be differently categorized into the top of your resume. So instead of having, in the example that I gave of the 5 and 5, instead of having 5 professional experiences at the top of your resume where only 2 of them are relevant, 3 aren't as relevant, but you still want to talk about them, and then having your research experience pulled under that, you're now combining both of them to the top so that, again, when I'm skimming, I'm able to really clearly tell, okay, you have all this experience that's related to the position. Does that clarify? Yeah? Awesome, no problem. Yeah.
So I noticed, it's on, can you hear? I noticed on a lot of U of T job applications, for example, they talk about they welcome applicants for people who have lived experience. I'd really like to know how you can put that into your resume or how you can speak to that in a cover letter, because I think that can be quite tricky. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there's no kind of right or wrong way. I think one of the ways that can be good to put it in, if you want to put it on your resume, because that's of course not directly related to any like role, unless it is related. Maybe you're on a committee or a task force that related to part of your experience or your identity. In that case, maybe you choose to include it like in the actual contents of some of the experiences that you've had. One way you could do it is by putting it into your highlighted qualification section. So again, depending on what that lived experience is, let's say you're an international student. You could say like a recent graduate with experience studying in 2 different countries, et cetera, and kind of pull it into something in your highlighted qualifications. That can end up being a little clunky sometimes, and depending on like your identity or the experience, it may be tricky to include. So it could involve talking about it. I think the cover letter tends to be a little bit of an easier place to talk about those things. So if you can reflect on if there's a way, like the easiest way I think to bring it in is if you've been affiliated with any like groups or organizations or have done any like advocacy or like community support or peer support, where you can talk about those experiences and pull them in. But I think in your cover letter, you can certainly go into a little bit of depth. Again, this is going to be different depending on like what the lived experience is.
So I think the international student ones maybe a bit, I mean, often they're looking for, someone who is 2SLBDT Q plus, or they're asking for someone who's got experience as a racialized person, or is in a minority community that has experienced a particular whatever. And so I think those are quite difficult ones, and they are looking to have teams with more diversity. So I was just wondering, like, I think, do you have you come across someone applying, or do you have an example for something that's slightly more sensitive?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for those ones, the first thing I would say is obviously the person's comfort, I think, is important. So one thing to note is just because an employer isn't is asking for that, making sure you feel comfortable disclosing whatever information you're comfortable disclosing. So I think like that point of check-in and not feeling like you have to perform aspects of your identity for a hiring committee is really important. So I always have to reference that first. Oftentimes, so depending on the company or the organization, I know like in academia, a lot of the ways that that information is captured is actually through self-disclosure in an actual application portal. So it may say select your sexual and gender identity, and you like put in what that is, or you put in your race or ethnicity or your religion into the form. So that is often when most companies that do that kind of thing tend to have some sort of screening process where you can self-disclose. In the cover letter, for example, you could say, so in the example of 2S LGBTQ plus students, you could say advocacy for folks in mathematics who identify as 2S LGBTQ plus has always been really important to me. Maybe you've had a story of a mentor who is 2S LGBTQ plus where you could pull it into that. Maybe an aspect of your research or the work that you've done, or in the context of public health, maybe that focuses on 2S LGBTQ plus folks or racialized folks if you identify as racialized or indigenous. So I think the big thing that I'm trying to get at, and maybe not saying that clearly, is that you want to connect it, like with anything, you want to connect it. If it's an experience, you want to connect it to your experiences. So thinking of how does this identity kind of help inform how I'm showing up in my workplaces, how I move through maybe the kind of research, my areas of interest, and bring it in that way. But generally, I find there are two sides to this that are really important to acknowledge, where again, the disclosure of these identities is important to, we can't control, even if an organization says that, we can't control who's actually reading the application. So folks may want to protect themselves from implicit biases and may not choose to disclose those identities and those experiences. So it's a really kind of nuanced conversation. I would say, again, if that's something that someone's really explicitly looking to pull into their documents, then if it's possible to like meet with a career advisor, meet with a career educator to really go into kind of what those things are. But it's a little tricky to kind of like abstractly state. But generally, I would say connected to actual examples or stories of how this might have impacted you, or maybe it's an even appreciation for, I see that you're, I'm interested in applying to this company because I see you prioritize applications for equity deserving folks. And as a racialized person, or as a 2S LGBTQ plus person, or as an indigenous person, this is something I really value in the workplaces that I enter. So that could be another way that you can include it. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah? Okay, awesome. Anything else? Yeah.
A little more on resume sections. So would you consider putting in a chronological summary of your official positions? Or for example, like if you're a postdoc, you have many different roles. You can be a researcher, you're also organizing certain things. So, and that maybe some of them will go to relevant experience. So how would we organize? Because you don't want to put like jobs that you had 5 years ago, and then after that followed by jobs you just had. I don't know. What order would you put that in?
Yeah, so definitely it's like a practice of being discerning on what is the most relevant. So I tend to, again, if it's an experience that's slightly older, so say you have two very similar experiences, one was a year ago, one was 5 years ago, and you're trying to cut down your resume, if the experiences are very similar, and if ultimately, let's say you're trying to show your research skills, you're trying to show your writing skills, your communication skills, your analysis skills, if the skills and competencies are pretty identical and the 5 year ago position isn't really adding a lot of value, I would recommend potentially leaving that off and then only focusing, like keeping the more recent experiences. There's no hard and fast rules around timelines of how long to keep something. Some people are in the same position for 10 or 15 years. Some people change every year and a half. So it's being discerning on what value is this individually adding to my application, and again, a balance of how much space you have. So whether it's 1 page or 2 pages. Okay. So for the highlighted qualifications, if you do choose to include this, this is typically the first section at the top of your resume. So we have 3 to 5 bullet points where it summarizes your experience based on the skills the employer is looking for. So again, really clearly those skills-based documents. So it typically replaces an objectives or profile header, and you would still tailor your highlighted qualifications to each job you're applying to. And as I mentioned earlier, with the highlighted qualifications being somewhat of an abstract for your resume, you want all additional information in your resume to build on this section. So what this could look like is something like this. So 2 years research and technical experience in the field of biomedical engineering, including experience working in a clean room. So one of the nice things about the highlighted qualification, especially if you've had a bunch of different experiences in a variety of different areas, and an organization says, we're looking for someone that has 3 years experience in this area of research. You can combine your master's, your PhD, some professional experience, some research experience, and compile that into saying 4+ or 5+ years experience in this area. So again, what this can do, or what including a highlighted qualification section can do for an employer, again, bringing back to that stat of 5 to 20 seconds that someone's looking at your resume, immediately when I see that you have 2 years experience in the field or 5 years experience in the field that I'm looking for, I don't manually have to go through and kind of count up the numbers and count up the dates of how long you've been somewhere. When I read it, it's immediately a check mark that, okay, this person has a lot of experience in this specific area. And because they have a lot of, hang on, it's jumped ahead. Because they have a lot of experience in this specific area, I may be more interested in hiring them. Again, you really want to tailor this. How I also like to, I like to ask myself guiding questions, or ask students or learners that I'm working with guiding questions on how to put their highlighted qualifications. If you're not sure what you want to put, the question I would ask you is, what are the top 3 to 5 things an employer needs to know about you to want to hire you? Sort of the top 3 to 5 core things that if you could only, like if I was your, I'm not sure if I believe in the concept of a dream job, but let's say for argument's sake, there is such a thing. If you come to me and I can hire you for your dream job and you could tell me only 3 to 5 things about yourself, what would those things be? And that might help you inform what you should include in your highlighted qualifications. And again, use that in recognition of, or in collaboration with the job posting as well, so you're tailoring it. So I wanted to do a little focus on skills. So for folks in the space, if you have a cell phone, you can try, hopefully it'll work. I've never tried it on a screen before like this, but hopefully you can scan the QR code, or you can visit menti.com and enter this code. And you're going to be prompted to answer about 5 different skills or competencies. So, and think broadly, that could be interpersonal skills, it can be technical skills, it could be research skills that you might be bringing. And then I'm going to give everyone a second to kind of get the code, enter everything. But then this is all going to go into something called a word cloud, and we'll kind of have a collective resource of the top kind of skills and competencies that hopefully you can take away and use this as a kind of a living document that can help you inform what you're going to put into your resume, what kind of terms and techniques or terms and phrases you'll put into your cover letter and resume. Give everyone a moment. Is the QR working? Yeah? Okay, cool. Thanks for testing. I've done this a lot virtually, so that's great. Is anyone still using the QR code or typing in the code? Or can I change to the word cloud screen? See a couple people with their phones. I'll wait a minute. Does anyone still need this, or can I switch to the page? If you need it, just raise your hand. That's totally fine. Good? Okay, awesome. Cool. Try and zoom in. This one? Oh, thank you so much. Perfect. Okay, awesome. Cool. So if folks haven't done a word cloud before, how it works is the words that are in the middle and that are the biggest are things that multiple people have said. So these are things that are like really important for everybody in this space. So we can see communication, that's for whatever role you're going into, that's super important. So communication is one of the most common skills that folks have said. We have things like writing, time management, coding, management, leadership, writing, learning, public speaking, being able to work under pressure, being a problem solver, mathematical modeling. So multiple people, we can see that that's a little bit bigger. So multiple folks have said mathematical modeling, building models, being able to be a fast learner, deep learner, programming, coding's getting more love, awesome. Report writing, let's see, mathematics generally, interpersonal skills, data science, data analytics, public health. I'm curious, just by show of hands, like obviously you wouldn't have all of these words in your current application documents, but how much do you feel like you're able to integrate kind of these skills and competencies that you've identified as really important? Do you feel like you've done, like feel free for raising hands, maybe raise your hand high if you feel like you're like, yeah, I've really captured those skills, or like maybe like in the middle if you're like, I kind of have done it, or feel free to not raise your hand if you feel like that's something that you might want to improve on. Curious for show of hands. So maybe so a little bit. Cool. And again, like we want to tailor our applications, so not all of these will be relevant to every role. I will take a screenshot of this to send out when I send out the slide deck, but if folks want to take a picture, you're welcome to do so and kind of use this again as like a group collective resource that you can use when you're building your cover letter and building your resume. Because obviously these are things that are important to other folks in your field as well. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, is there one specifically or any specifically that you're like that are jumping out to you? Teamwork. Totally. Yeah, so when we, so the Business Council of Canada in 2020 did a survey of over 500 different employers, and they identified the top skills in entry-level, mid-level, and senior-level hires. Like teamwork and collaboration is consistently one of the top 2 skills. So interestingly, technical skills, like while very important, those are things that can often be trained. Again, not always. Technical skills in mid-level roles are much more important. But collaboration is always important in any role, and being able to demonstrate that you're a team player, that you can work with others, that you can work with people in different fields to you is going to be really important. You can tell on whether or not you'd want to include some of these words into the job by how much they're emphasizing things. So if a position talks about teamwork, it talks about collaboration, it talks about working in groups, it talks about interdisciplinary collaboration, then you may want to choose to include those words. So again, using it in reference to the job posting. Right. Okay, let me go back. I'll go through these slightly quickly, but these are skills. So this is a resource from the University of Michigan Career Center, and they've talked about a lot of skills, particularly that people in academia bring into industry. And these are things that get left out, I find, a lot when folks are really focusing on like their academic knowledge or that background. So one of the big areas is interpersonal and leadership skills. So being able to facilitate discussions or meetings, being able to collaborate on projects, being able to teach skills or concepts, participating in knowledge translation. In public health, that's such an important thing to be able to do. Being able to navigate complex bureaucratic environments, and also being able to oversee or mentor. Project management and organization. Oftentimes folks might go for PM roles, or a lot of positions require, even if they're not project manager roles, they may require a lot of project management skills. That's something that you've absolutely been able to demonstrate and build throughout your academic career. So managing a project or goals from beginning to end, that's something that an employer really wants to see, because they want to know that you're able to initiate something and see it through. So that's something that's really important to be able to highlight as you talk about your academic experiences. Being able to identify tasks and goals to be accomplished and determine a reasonable timeline for completion. And being able to show that you are successfully able to meet that timeline will make that even stronger. Being able to prioritize tasks while balancing other problems, priorities, and deadlines. Another big skill that can translate from academia to work in industry. This is important in academia as well too, of course, so you can use it kind of for both. Research and communication is the final section. So be able to understand and synthesize large quantities of data. So as folks in mathematics for public health, like this one will be really relevant. And then again, being able to talk about that data in a way that can be interpreted really easily or be usable by maybe people who are in public health or maybe in more like science or like life science focused roles, being able to translate that data so it's usable or it's able to be used by the community, the public health organization, whomever that you're working with. Being able to design and analyze research projects and surveys, organize and communicate complex information to small and large groups. Anytime you can include numbers, like if you had to give a presentation to 50 people or 200 people, that can be really great to show as well, to show the scale of the work that you've been able to do. And then of course, being able to write effective grant proposals. So these are all things, again, and the next slide will emphasize what I've been talking about a lot, but using the job posting. So again, while those skills that are listed are really transferable things that you've likely picked up from your time in academic spaces, you still want to use them in reference, even if like project management is something that you've done a lot of, but isn't so relevant to the position you're applying for. You may not want to include that or highlight that as your top experience. So I recommend reviewing the job posting to identify key transferable skills. My approach, and it differs for everybody, I really like to take a job posting and some people like to print it out, some people like to copy and paste it into a Word document, and then I like to highlight words that I'm seeing repeated or like core skills or like industry terminology. I'm a color coder, so I like to pick different colors for different categories. And that can help jog my memory of how I'm going to incorporate those into my resume or into my cover letter or into my CV. You want to look at how often things are referenced. So again, if you're seeing words like team player, collaborator, in groups, that's a good flag to you that you might want to identify some of your collaboration or times when you've worked on projects with a group of people on your document. Reading between the lines. So if they say, we deal with over 500 stakeholders in this portfolio, you may want to read between the lines and say that, well, there's communication involved in that. There's also good time management. There's also prioritization. There's all sorts of skills that go into that. So reading between the lines becomes important. Using industry-specific language and terminology. So not only looking at the job posting, but looking at LinkedIn, looking at the company or institution's website. And then, of course, researching the company, the hiring manager, and the industry as well. This I always want to touch upon because I think that this is a really clear and concise way of talking about your experiences in a way that will be really received well by employers. So accomplishment statements are the bullet points that describe each of your experiences on your resume or your CV. And this is I call it a magic formula that you start with an action verb and you want the action verb to demonstrate what the skill you're referencing in that bullet point will be. So if you're trying to showcase that you've researched, maybe the first thing that you write, the action verb you choose is researched or analyzed, something that relates to the specific competency. This also ties into when someone's scanning your resume within that 5 or 20-second window. If I'm just looking at the first words of all your bullet points, I can see, okay, research, analysis, collaboration. Again, in my mind, tick, 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 you're going into the read further pile. Then you want to go into what you did, so contextualize the situation. And then the part that not almost everybody, but a lot of people forget that's so important and can make such a difference for an employer is the purpose or an impact that was able to have. So did you improve timelines? Were you able to reduce error by a specific margin? What was the impact? Were you able to encourage senior leadership to include a specific topic or area in a final policy paper? What was the specific purpose or impact? And that really shows the purpose or impact that you're going to be able to bring into the role that you're applying for. So some sample accomplishment statements you can see here. Synthesize scientific findings and drafted daily analytical papers for senior management. So you want to include qualitative information where possible. So daily, weekly, how many people you've worked with. You can see results like winning the department's Teaching of Excellence Award, or the fact that you drafted it for senior management. So it's showcasing that you've been able to have influence at a senior leadership level. Any questions on accomplishment statements before I move through LinkedIn? Good? Okay, awesome. So for LinkedIn, just by show of hands, how many people are you currently, if you're currently on LinkedIn, I guess, raise your hand. So almost everybody. Cool. Awesome. So in terms of why to use LinkedIn, these are some of the key reasons. So of course, being able to build a network of professionals in your field, it's a really great way to kind of passively network so that people can see your profile and see how see your story and your experiences. It can help you develop and maintain an online presence and professional identity. Research also shows that employers are less likely to hire someone who doesn't have an online presence at all. So having an online presence has become increasingly important. So being searchable and being able to be found online is critical, and an online LinkedIn is one of the best places to have that professional online presence. But of course, depending on what area you're going into, look where the people in your industry are. So maybe that's Twitter, maybe it's LinkedIn, maybe it's other places. But generally, it's really important to develop an online presence. It can help you conduct research on companies. I like to use LinkedIn to see how people got to this specific role. So often, like, what was the first job that they got after they graduated? It can help you determine how you build up or get where you want to go. You can attract recruiters and employers' attention, and then also keeping up to date with news in your sector, and then also applying for jobs and receiving job alerts. So the more you build out your profile, the more you follow different company or organizations' pages, the more the algorithm is going to feed you types of positions that are similar to your interests, but also it's going to make it more accessible for recruiters in your field to find you on LinkedIn, which is so important as well. So the important things for a great profile are your headline, your photo, summary, recommendations, and then making sure you've completed all sections. So LinkedIn calls that an all-star profile. You can also personalize your URL, which is something that can make it really helpful if you're at a conference like this and you want to share your LinkedIn with someone, if it's just your name, if you're lucky enough to be able to get just your name, but trying to figure out a really user-friendly LinkedIn handle that you can share quite easily as well. I know we're getting to time, so I will go through these a little bit quickly, but these are some examples of photos, banners, and headlines. And the big things I want folks to kind of pick up on here is the relevancy. So we can see in Trey's example, there's different ways you can do it. So you can see Tayaba, they have their title, which is completely appropriate. If you wanted to say your job title, where you work, you can also put different areas of expertise or different areas of interest, sometimes set apart with that horizontal line. That can be a really good way to differentiate if you have like analytics, public health, if you want to kind of highlight different areas or parts of the work that you're seeking or interested in. Savannah's done a really good job of that. Knowledge management, information architecture, design thinking, and empowerment. What's interesting about this one is this might not be someone who has a role in their field. So depending on where you are in your career, your academic career, if you don't have specific titles that you can pull on, like physiotherapist or communication specialist, you can combine kind of the core areas or core parts of the industry or work and put them in it that way. I'll use John as a good example of creating a background that like really relates to their field and area. So you can see psychotherapy, coaching, and counseling. They have their website and a quote. Tayaba has, I always forget what the image is, but it's related to cancer research. I know that. So just making sure that whatever you're putting on LinkedIn, this is what people see. And again, thinking in the terms of people making really quick decisions on you when they see your profile. Your photo, so having a clear photo where you're smiling, looking professional, preferably with a clear background. I heard a rumor that you're going to be able to take awesome photos in just a little bit. So great tool. Definitely take advantage of that because it's, I can't remember right off the top of my head right now, I can't remember the stat, but it's something like you're 50 times more likely to get clicked on if you have a photo than no photo. So if you're comfortable and willing to put a photo up on LinkedIn, it really makes a difference. So the About section, a couple of things to note. Only the first 3 lines are seen in searches. So you really want to maximize what you're including in those first 3 lines. So you can see here we have clear descriptors, high energy, results oriented, with a wealth of HR consulting expertise. Occupational psychologist with extensive assessment and coaching experience across this industry. So we have a really good idea about who this person is, what they're bringing interpersonally to the role, also what industry areas of expertise they have, what their background is, what some of their titles have been. But this red part here is going to be the most important. So sometimes people will list skills at the bottom, and that can help you get flagged with the LinkedIn algorithm if someone's searching for something. So some people will just list the skills at the bottom, and then at the top, making sure you have a really clear, impactful About section. Also incorporating keys, so searchable industry-specific words, because that makes it much more likely, again, that a recruiter is going to be able to find your page. And searchability and you being recommended to recruiters is a way of you being able to, again, passively network and passively find jobs. So you're only supporting yourself if you spend a little bit of time to make your About section really tailored and searchable to the industry you're looking at applying for roles in. These are some prompt questions, and again, I'll go through these quite quickly, but I'll send the slides. Can they be shared out? Is that possible, Benjamin? Oh, we're recording it. Amazing. So you can just get them after. Great. So what skills do you have to offer? What are you known for? What are your areas of interest? And what knowledge do you have to share? So these are some good prompt questions for you as you decide what you want to include in your About section. Few more things. So creating short paragraphs or bullet points that are easy to scan. Scannability is really important. I'm sure as folks in academia, you're well versed with scanning, and your resume and cover letter and your LinkedIn are no different. You want to make sure you can really scan it and it's really clear what the core things that you want to share are. So summarizing the values, skills, strengths, opportunities you're seeking. There's no one way of doing it. You can also write for the job you want or the role that you have. So again, depending on where you are in your career, you can speak into the future about what you're seeking and what you're hoping to learn. Also talking a little bit about, of course, what your competencies and skills are currently and what you have to offer. And then include accomplishment statements. So that action verb, what you did and the result or impact. You want to have measurable metrics and results from projects and experiences to, again, we're trying to facilitate trust and faith that the organization will have, that you'll be capable and able to perform well in their organization. Utilizing the digital space. So if you have links in media, if you have any articles, projects, case studies, just certainly remember to include those as well. Just wanted to highlight the alumni finder. So this is actually quite helpful. If you go to the U of T's page and go to the alumni tab, you can search people from, and you can do this for not just U of T, but whatever institution you're coming from. I believe they all have an alumni finder. And what I like about it is you can see people who have graduated from your program or who are in the area that you'd like to be in. And you can also distill it into what year they graduated. So I often will if I'm supporting someone with networking or if I'm networking myself, you might want to choose people who have graduated between like 2019 and 2022, because recent graduates may be more receptive to having a conversation with you. Also, groups are a really good place to build your network and build your connections on LinkedIn as well. Won't go too in depth with this because this can be more of a template that you have for when you're reaching out to folks, but you can see this is a person you've met. So Stuart, really talking about how you met. Thank you. So having a clear thank you is always a nice thing to send if you're looking to connect with someone, and then a clear ask of what you're looking for. So it'd be great to stay in touch as I consider my options after graduation. So you're sharing why you're reaching out to them. For someone you haven't met, it's a little bit different. You're saying what you've seen on their LinkedIn, what you've assessed. Again, there's an ask. I'd like to learn how you got started in your career. If you have any advice, thank you for taking the time. The reason why I see you graduated from immunology at U of T. Whenever you can find a point of connection or point of interest that connects you with the person you're reaching out to, that's always really good. And oftentimes it's the institution that you attended. So if you attended York, you may want to connect with a York alumni and say, hey, I also went to York, wondering what your experience was transitioning from York into industry or from that program. So always seek out, if you haven't connected with someone in the past, seek out a point of commonality. Maybe you worked in a different country, and they've worked in the same country as you. Try and find places where you can authentically interact with and connect with folks. In terms of maintaining the network, you want to update your status. So keeping involved and active on LinkedIn is really important. You can share posts, you can write articles. Commenting on other people's posts and articles is another great way of passive networking. Some people may feel uncomfortable reaching out for like an informational interview or a coffee chat, but even just liking people's posts and saying, this is an awesome article, thanks for sharing, you're still keeping your name in their orbit, so that if you reach out to them in the future, they're familiar with your name, so it doesn't feel kind of like as much of a stretch. So it helps you kind of build and maintain those contacts. Introduce yourself to people, but also introduce people to other people that you know. So thinking about kind of like principles of reciprocity, how you can give back, how you might be able to connect them with someone else who they might be interested in meeting. And then lending a hand. So offering maybe to send an article that, if you talked about an area of research and you know an article that might be helpful for what they're focusing on, maybe share that article with them. Maybe connect them with someone in your network. Maybe write a reference for them on LinkedIn and write really nice things about how they've been able to support you or how receptive they were to supporting you as you kind of journey through your career. So thinking about ways you can contribute and give back as you're connecting with people on LinkedIn is going to be really important too. And then these are the last few slides. So I know we're over, but this is my little bit of fast talking at the end. But there's two big reasons to use LinkedIn: job searching and career exploration. Depending on where you are, you may focus on one of these areas more so and then transition into the other one. So for job searching, the big things to take away are setting up job alerts on the job board. I'm a fan of making our lives a little bit easier where we can. So if you have like specific organizations, like if you're looking at the Government of Ontario or Ontario Public Health or like specific organizations, maybe setting up job alerts with the titles for those organizations on LinkedIn so that you're getting constant updates when new positions are posted, so you don't have to constantly check back. Following companies on your wish list, as I shared, it's going to be really important because it helps cater and tailor your LinkedIn profile to the industry that you're in. You can learn about salaries and earning potential. LinkedIn also does skills matching and building. You can display recommendations. So I really recommend like giving other people recommendations and seeing if they can give recommendations to you, because these are great ways for, to instill trust. And when an employer looks at your profile, that you have people vouching for you. Using hashtags is really great to optimize your visibility on LinkedIn. And then, of course, networking. So the hidden job market refers to roles that aren't posted, but that are given through referral. And that's really, really common and increasingly so. So knowing people in the organizations, while not absolutely necessary, is going to really, really, really help you through your job search process. Then on the flip side, career exploration. So you can look at industry profiles. Research graduate career paths, as I shared, that's one of my favorite ways to use LinkedIn, because I think can really help set up like what's the next step that you can take once you graduate. Connect with professionals for informational interviews, build your network of contacts, maybe you join some groups where you can network with people, and then also identify industry trends. All of that, that's everything for today. These are